And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Chris Hoff, who's Data Protection and Ransomware Marketing Manager at Veeam, and Melissa Palmer, who's Team Lead and Senior Technologist for Product Strategy at Veeam. Chris, Melissa, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. This is really exciting. We're really glad to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to get out of the way and leave it to you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So I'm Chris Hoff. I'm a product marketing manager here at Veeam. I'm adjusting my screens right now so that I can see all the questions coming in. I'm joined here today by Melissa Palmer. And Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself, because I'm not going to do it justice.
Oh, yes, you will. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Palmer. I'm a senior technologist on the product strategy team here at Veeam, and I'm also a VMware certified design expert.
Underselling it, but so our topic today is ransomware. I've spent the last 20 some odd years in the security space, focused mostly on malware. And one of the things that's just a truism these days is that the attackers have an infinite number of chances to attack you and only need to be successful once, where you as the defender need to be 100% accurate 100% of the time, because if you're wrong once, you're going to get owned. And so the odds are not in our favor. And so when we talk about those odds, and we put it in the context of modern day ransomware, we're struggling to keep up, quite honestly. And one of the reasons that we're struggling is that ransomware has essentially democratized security. And what I mean by that is that prior to the advent of modern day ransomware, prior to the advent of crypto and these ways to transfer funds anonymously, you had to have something that the attacker wanted and could monetize in order to be a targeted victim. And so that included things like credit card information, health information, social security numbers. All of that type of data could be sold and could make money for the attacker. These days, the only person who needs to see value in the data that's being air quotes stolen is you as the victim. You just need to be willing to pay money to get that information back. It doesn't have to be valuable to anybody else. And one of the things that we see all the time, and it's reflected in our data protection report, it's going to be reflected actually in our upcoming ransomware report that will be released next month, is that it is hard, almost impossible, I would say, to actively recover from a large-scale ransomware attack without considering paying the ransom. And the reason for that is that, quite honestly, our environments are too large and complex. The recovery process takes time. And as Melissa constantly reminds me, we do a really poor job of disaster recovery planning. And so we want to address that today, because every disaster is different, and ransomware is a disaster. Just like caught myself. Stop laughing at me. I know.
I can't help it.
Similar to a fire or a flood, you're losing access to your stuff. And we don't like to have our stuff taken away. But in the case of ransomware, it's not just the case where you can click the restore button and watch your data come back. Your disaster recovery process is going to involve senior management. It's going to involve your legal team. It's probably going to involve marketing and HR. It's going to involve the entire security team doing the event analysis. And finally, we're going to get to the point where we can recover the data. And so the complexity just behind that entire process leaves a lot of gaps that we need to fill. And so, when we say ransomware is a disaster, we truly mean it. And so, Melissa, you spend a lot of time dealing with this. You spent a lot of time advocating for better, I would say, better disaster recovery planning. So take us through a little bit of what you're seeing out there and what we need to do to make recovering from ransomware the better option than actually paying the ransom.
Absolutely, Chris. So ransomware is a disaster. I don't think anybody can dispute that, but it is the disaster we can almost plan for, because at this point we can almost expect a ransomware attack in our environment, right? It just takes one user to click something and they're in. So this is the disaster that we need to plan for. Like, it's going to happen. I know a lot of times traditionally people haven't put a lot of emphasis on disaster recovery because they're like, you know what? We're just going to accept the risk because we're only going to lose $300,000 from an outage, and it's going to cost us $600,000 to put in this DR plan. So you know what? Forget it. We're going to accept the risk and pay the $300,000. That doesn't work with ransomware, because your ransom that you get ransomed for is probably going to be way more, and you're never actually going to recover your data because you don't have it backed up. And more importantly, let's say you do pay the ransom, you do decrypt the data, you can't trust that data anymore. You're still going to have to recover for backup at the end of the day. So what I want to do is basically take you through how we can use some helpful tips for disaster/ransomware recovery planning, things to keep in mind, and how the Veeam platform can help protect you, right? As long as we do this work up front now, we can be protected later, so we can recover later. Not only recover, we're going to know exactly how long that recovery is going to take because we're going to test it. So let's kind of dive a little deeper into ransomware and disaster recovery and the steps we can take now so we can recover later and not bother paying that ransom. So
Awesome.
this is going to be fun, Chris. So let's start with some disaster recovery basics. Very important when it comes to ransomware recovery. You need to know your RPOs and RTOs for each application. That's your recovery point objective, or what point in time are you recovering to, and your recovery time objective, or how long does it take you to recover. You need to know those from each application, and that's not just a backup or an infrastructure or a tech play, right? We're going to have to get together with our business stakeholders and decide what these values are for each application. Until we have an understanding like this, we really can't meet these business requirements, and it's going to be really hard to recover in time, whatever that might be. We also need to know different ways to meet our RPOs and RTOs, because there's a bunch of different ways to meet any of these values, and a lot of it ties back to cost, right? No matter what, you're going to have a certain budget, or a certain application might have lower RPOs and RTOs because it's really important and has a significant monetary value to the company, right? We also need to know that we are meeting these RTOs and RPOs. And here's this last one, and this is really important, especially for ransomware recovery. We need to know where we're recovering to. Remember, every disaster is different. I have spoken to people who say, you know what? We get ransomware, we're just going to recover right in place. We're good to go. And I say, that's nice, but what if your vSphere environment is struck by ransomware and you have no recovery environment? What if law enforcement is involved and says, sorry, we're quarantining the environment to do an investigation. You can't recover here. So you need to know where you're recovering, which means you have to have multiple recovery options and test them all, right? So again, it ties back to knowing that you can meet your RPO and RTO at different locations under different scenarios. So that is kind of just some things to think of when we're going into disaster recovery. And of course, we need to have that disaster recovery plan, right? Disaster recovery plans, of course, need to be very well documented, or better yet, automated and orchestrated, because the person who wrote that plan might not be the person recovering. We never know who's going to be on call to recover and what that's going to look like. They have to be up to date. It is so easy for our environments to change today, especially if they're VMware based. So we got to make sure that all those new VMs that come online are covered by our DR plan. And then recently and thoroughly tested. Now, when I say thoroughly tested, I mean a legitimate DR test, not the DR test you do to please your auditors where you said, okay, once a month, I'm going to go recover a server and prove I can recover. Yeah, that doesn't work. You need to do real world full scale disaster recovery testing because you need to know that you can meet those RPOs and RTOs under any scenario. And many times, a ransomware attack could be a total loss scenario, right? Where everything is encrypted, everything's gone. So if you're using something like a disaster recovery site, because it's a separate site, it has separate networking, they probably won't get into it. That's great, but you need to test a large scale recovery so you know where that recovery will fail. You might find out, hey, we were going to go recover 3 applications at a time, but you know what? We have better performance if we do 2 applications at a time. So that's what we need to do. Or hey, this is the certain order we need to recover our applications in, but guess what? We missed an interdependency, so it turns out we need to flip-flop the order. So a real-world full-scale test is really important to prove that you can meet those RPOs and RTOs.
So you're essentially saying take out the response of I think or it should work like this.
No,
right?
You should not. You should, and I just said you should. You should know. You must know. How about that? You must know that you can meet these values. You must know that you can recover in time, right? Because we don't want you not being able to recover and having to pay that ransom.
There's actually some really good questions coming in already. Yeah, this is going to be good. It's going to be tough for deciding who's asking the best question.
No.
We've got questions. We've got questions in here about is it different? Is it a different planning for a SaaS environment versus your on premise, and they're actually using Kronos as the example.
So it kind of depends on how you're doing your DR planning for SaaS and on-prem as well, right? Because then when you get into SaaS, it's your data, right? And you need to be able to recover it someplace in the event that someone gets in through your implementation of the SaaS stack based on that. Or you remember that person's a huge threat vector as well, right? If someone gets into the SaaS system and wrecks everything, what do you do, right? So of course, even though you're using a SaaS platform, you're still responsible for your data. So it's important to, again, know the RTOs and RTOs for whatever SaaS application it is and have a backup of that data so you can recover it to that SaaS platform or even on-prem in some cases should something go horribly wrong. So it's really, a lot of it just ties right back to disaster recovery planning, but going in knowing that it is going to happen versus, maybe it will, maybe it won't.
Cool. So there's questions in here. Actually, I know you're gonna get into about the processes around fully documenting your backup.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get there.
We're gonna totally get there.
Hang in there.
Shout out to Rick Vanover. We got some Rick fans in here.
Yes, Rick Vanover is the man.
So let's push ahead because this is we could answer questions all day.
Yeah, let's start with protect, right? So how do we protect our data so we can recover it later? That's important, right? So let's talk about a couple different aspects of data protection, right? So first of all, I'm going to hit these RPOs and RTOs over and over again because they're super important. But choose your data protection, right? Choose the right kind of data protection. If we talk about Veeam specifically, no matter what type of data is, from your near zero RPO stuff that we're going to protect with Veeam Continuous Data Protection or CDP, to your regular Veeam replicas, to your backups, to your storage, protect them the right way. And this is not only an RPO play, but an RTO play, right? So if I have something that has a 12-hour RPO, but a 5-minute RTO. And I don't know that that's a valid scenario, but I'm throwing it out there, right? That means I don't need to protect it that often, but if it's offline, I need to bring it back fast. So to me, that just screams replication, right? Replicas, it's a matter of starting up a server and you're back online. A CDP is basically an instant failover. And but a backup, right? A traditional backup, if we're backing something up, those restores take time. And of course, we need to test those to see how long that's actually going to take. So again, a lot of it is choosing the right type of data protection. So what flavor of data protection will I pick for this workload to meet my RPOs and RTOs? Then it kind of comes to storing those backup files the right way. So a lot of people right now throw around the term, and I have to build out this slide again, I'm sorry, immutability quite a bit. One more, I think. Let's hope I don't mess this up again. Let's just leave it there. Throughout the term immutability quite a bit, right? And all immutability means is my backup data cannot be changed or can't be modified. It can't be encrypted if it can't be deleted or modified. It can't be encrypted if it can't be modified. So if we've got an immutable copy of our backup data, they can't get to it, right? Or they can get to it, but they can't actually do anything to it, right? Especially with the Veeam portable data format. If you're backing up with Veeam, I don't care what happens to your VBR server. Like seriously, I do not care. I do not need your VBR server. It is a piece of cattle. Take it out back, turn it into some steaks. I don't care. If you're using Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you have a second backup server waiting for you if you need it. I had a case where I needed it once when I got ransomware in the cloud. It was a fun experience. But we don't care about your backup environment. All we care about your backups. We're going to store those in a mutable fashion. We're going to have multiple copies of them. So if something happens, we're able to recover, right? The performance tier through the hardened repository, that's kind of, the most recent copy of your backup, super fast, super low RTO, and then we'll age things out or copy things to the capacity tier. So you can send things to AWS or an S3 compatible storage. There's lots of different providers and vendors out there because remember, Veeam's hardware agnostic. I don't really care about the hardware you use either. We have a ton of Veeam ready partners when it comes to repositories, object storage, and object storage with immutability, because at the end of the day, we want to help you build the best solution to meet your needs, no matter what your requirements or your price point is, right? So if we have a mutable copy of our data, another immutable copy someplace else, and a third copy of our data, remember, we want 3 copies of our data at least, we're pretty much good to go no matter the scenario. Now, object storage is great because it could be an immutable copy, but it could be waiting in the wings for you someplace, right? So I can send it to my favorite public cloud provider so I can recover it in the public cloud if I need to, or to a VMware cloud environment, right? We could do all sorts of creative things to make sure on disaster day that we can actually recover our workloads. So that's super important right there. Having an immutable copy of your backup data. Now we can see the locks building out where it says, hey, look, I've got immutability all throughout my data lifecycle. That is fantastic. And we've got our Veeam ready storage that's certified. It makes the decision really easy once you've determined what your requirements are.
So there's a question here related to that, and I threw it over onto the bigger screen. How do you move back into production after? Oh, it's automatically scrolling. Look out. How do you move back into production after using Veeam Instant Recovery? Is there a backend sync process that has to take place?
There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, kind of based on the scenario. You can basically just make that, use the instant VM recovery. Instant VM recovery technology. And then you can just move it off into VMware, make that the copy. You could, if you're using, you could back it up again, send it back. You could turn it into a replica. There's a million different ways to do it, again, based on your specific environment and what your requirements are, right? So it kind of is a bigger discussion than what's the way I should do this? Well, it really depends on a lot of different things in your environment. And again, it's very flexible.
Cool.
All right. Double and triple play immutability. That's kind of just like what I talked about, right? We want to make sure that we have multiple immutable copies. So we have that Linux immutable repository on-prem and maybe S3 backups. And then, tape gets a really bad name, but I don't know, it's kind of making a little bit of a comeback, right, Chris? In the age of ransomware, there's nothing wrong with having some worm tapes, right? It's valid.
We actually saw in the data protection report that 21% of the 4,000 some odd customers, 3,000 some odd customers not customers, 3,000 organizations that we talk to are still using tape.
All right.
What's more immutable than flipping the switch on here, right?
Nothing really. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about detection. And I am about to take everything about monitoring and possibly throw it out the window and put it in a new context, right? So what do people think of when they think about monitoring? I'm looking at my VMs and I'm making sure their CPU and memory is within range and the performance good. And, that's what a lot of people think of when they think of monitoring. But the truth is, just like we monitor all our critical VM workloads, we also need to monitor our data protection environment because, hey, it's just the backups, right? But it is actually super important that we detect any issues with data protection before they become issues, right? Because if there's something wrong in our data protection environment, if we're not meeting RPOs, we need to know that now so we can recover later. Another great thing we can do at Veeam is make sure all of your assets are actually protected, right? Once you kind of connect everything together, connect to your vSphere environment, your public cloud, what have you. Veeam will actually show you this great report called the protected VMs or workloads or public cloud workloads, whatever report. But it shows you what's unprotected. It's going to show you the assets that are at risk, and through automatic remediation actions in Veeam 1, you can automatically start protecting that data, right? Even if it's just like a catch-all 12 or 24-hour RPO job to make sure I have some base level of protection so I can recover it later. So we have to make sure all of our assets are protected. We have to make sure that our protection jobs are running and complete as expected. And if anything does not go according to plan, we want to receive alerts and act automatically and intelligently when something goes wrong, right? So remember, your data protection environment is suddenly a lot more critical because, hey, guess what? If you are ransomware, which you will be, you need to be able to recover. Why don't we look for some signs of ransomware while we're at it too, right? And there's a lot of things that we can do either out of the box or, based on what you're seeing in your environment, stuff like that. So out of the box, we can take a look at the possible ransomware activity alarm. And we're going to look at our VMs and our hosts and look for common signs of ransomware, right? So, oh, wow, this disk write rate is suddenly through the roof. Why are all my VM disks writing all at the same time? Yeah, they're probably encrypting. So that's one thing we're going to look at. If you go and do any threat intel, you can read a lot about how the actual ransomware works. And a lot of times they basically go and they try to peg those CPUs and just encrypt everything as quick as possible. Or they take another approach where it's much slower, but you're going to see an increased CPU utilization. That's going to be key. So looking at things like your CPU utilization, your disk write rate, and of course, network transmit rate. Because if a server starts randomly transmitting data that it's never done that before, chances are that's a good sign of exfiltration when the actors are literally trying to take the data out of your environment so they can charge you a ransom later. So we have a couple alarms out of the box that will do that. We're going to look at your incremental backups and let you know when something looks a little sus, right? Because if things are slowly encrypting, guess what? That is a data that has to be backed up, and we're going to see it. We're going to see those incrementals growing. And again, we can monitor network performance. We can build alarms based off specific performance measures and find all of those unprotected assets as well if we need to. So there's a lot of things that we can do from a monitoring perspective to make sure that we will be able to recover later and even detect signs of ransomware in the environment. Chances are, I'm going to be perfectly honest, if you're detecting ransomware in your backup environment, you have missed the boat, my friends. This is your last line of defense, right? We're here to make sure that you can recover on disaster day. You should have something else in your environment that is looking for ransomware, that is looking for the actors coming in, that is looking for exfiltration. It should not be your backup system trying to catch, by the way, you've been ransomware, right? So this is a part of your security incident response process. And as of that, you should have security monitoring and security event reporting systems in place and not just be relying on, oh, well, maybe my backup, I'll catch it in the backup. Yeah, we'll catch it in the backup, but it's a little late.
You're completely boned after if you're catching it in the backup.
It's really too late.
So
it's not too late to recover. It's too late to stop it. Let's put it that way.
You and I have talked about this a lot.
Over and over again.
That one of the things that's common in every postmortem for a ransomware attack over the past 10, 12 years is that there was a problem with network segmentation, right? The network was totally flat. There was a problem with password policies. Like in some cases, there weren't any. Password reuse.
Chris and I are laughing because we do this like day in and day out. This is all we do, folks. We see the same stuff over and over and over again.
It's kind of I call it the knucklehead stuff, right? It's the kind of easy stuff that we take for granted. And I'll put in the caveat that network segmentation is hard.
It is.
There are legitimate reasons why you can't segment certain parts of your network. You just can't do it. And firewalls are not segmentation. So putting in the time and the effort to actually build out the infrastructure so that you're reducing the risk of a ransomware attack is going to be key to recovering quickly from one. It's not just about the backups and making sure that you can recover quickly, which preemptively answers one of the questions that was in the Q&A over here. There was also evidently I stumbled over my words a bit. 21% of companies are still using tape. Is the answer to one of the questions over here. But it really is about having that more comprehensive architectural approach to your security, and backup and recovery is part of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Speaking of backup and recovery, let's continue to flip monitoring on the side and talk about monitoring with recovery in mind, right? So monitor your recovery resources to make sure they're ready at a moment's notice. Kind of a no-brainer, but I can't tell you the number of customers I've dealt with throughout the course of my career where, oh yeah, we have all the old hardware in DR and we don't have service contracts. We went to turn it on and it didn't turn on. Or yeah, that VMware host failed and we just left it there because no one was paying attention to it because it's just the DR site, right? So we want to make sure that there's no hardware or software issues. Or this is my all-time favorite. I see it all the time. I installed vSphere in DR and I left the evaluation license. So when I go on disaster day to recover, I can't because I don't have licenses in vSphere. Very quick fix, but not something you want to be dealing with on disaster day. And also capacity, right? Do you have enough capacity to recover? We can do sizing exercises. We can pull sizing data from D1. And of course, we want to do our regular DR testing to stress test the environment so we can find any places where things will fall down before they fall down. It's all about being ready, right? That is what we want to do. We want to be ready for ransomware because it will happen.
And it's also going to affect your cyber insurance policy as well.
Oh yeah.
There's more and more emphasis being put on the hardware that you've got in place. That old Cisco switch that's sitting over in the corner. For me, it's sitting over there. It doesn't have a service contract on it. It's end of life. That's gonna cause your cyber insurance premium to either go up, or it's gonna be a reason why they're not gonna pay.
Right. So let's get to my personal favorite here. Let's talk about recovering, right? And this is part of getting ready to recover too. So we're gonna talk about planning for recovering and actual recovery. First and most important step is decide where will you recover? And you might have multiple answers here. It could be your DR site. It could be a colo. It could be a service provider. It could be the public cloud. It could be the VMware cloud. I don't care where you recover to. I just care that you have a couple places that you plan on recovering to. And most importantly, you have your data there to recover from. So that's one of the reasons I love object storage so much. I want to use VMware Cloud on AWS to recover. I'm going to put my backups in S3. So guess what? They're really close to VMC and my recovery speeds will actually be pretty good. And we'll test that, of course. We'll do some restores. We'll see everything is great, but know where you will recover. And this might take a little research. It might take a little planning, but you need to have multiple options and kind of plan for all the different scenarios, especially the scenario where you can't actually use any of your production equipment. That is something I see more than often than not.
And it's becoming more and more popular when you pull in law enforcement.
Oh yeah, they're going to quarantine you. So let's talk about recoverability from backups. This is from the DPR report, DPR Trends 2022. In your handouts, you also have a copy of the State of Disaster Recovery in 2022. I highly recommend giving that a read. That is an excellent executive brief. But recoverability from backups. Thinking about the most significant ransomware attack your organization has suffered in the last 12 months, what percentage of data was your organization able to recover from the attack? That is not 100, and that is inexcusable. There's no reason that shouldn't be 100 because you should have tested your recovery processes already. You should have monitored to make sure that you were protecting all your assets, and this just should not happen. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can make sure this does not happen. So we've talked about protecting your data. We've talked about monitoring your data protection and making sure that you are protecting everything you're going to recover. And let's start talking about creating those DR plans and testing them. So it's all about disaster recovery orchestration. And this ties right back to what we were talking about before about with CDP, replicas, backup, and storage, right? Kind of the four horsemen of data protection. When we add disaster recovery orchestration on top of that, Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator is an add-on to Veeam Backup and Replication or Veeam Availability Suite. We're talking about DR, dynamic documentation. My friend who asked about DR documentation, Orchestrator will do it for you and send it to your mailbox. It will send you your DR plan with a full audit log. It will send you a lightweight check daily to make sure that you're meeting your RPOs. And every time you run a DR test, which you can do scheduled or on demand, it will send you a report on that too. Now, there's one more report, which I hope is the report that no one ever has to look at, is the plan execution report. So if something happened and I do need to actually run my disaster recovery plan and recover, that'll be documented for you too. Really easy to use and customizable. So dynamic documentation, best of all, it updates for you, right? It's going to update and you can have that new report generated every day or whenever you feel like it. Just go in there and click update definition report. That's all there is to it, or it comes every day. Automated testing. Now, scheduled or on-demand automated testing, you go in and it's like literally like 3 clicks and your DR test is running. Most importantly, you can leave that environment running for a time period afterwards. So let's say a couple hours to let the application teams come in and kick the tires, right? We see a lot of issues with 0-day exploits, right? And vulnerabilities now. That's like super hot and there's always patches. Well, how do you test those patches? You run a DR test, you leave your environment running, you go in, you test your patches, you know you're good to go, and you roll them out to production. And you can do that with a couple clicks or, like I said, on a scheduled basis. So we talked about patch testing, DR testing. It's great for training new personnel, right? I don't want to give them the keys to the kingdom on this app. Let them kick the tires on an isolated environment. Penetration testing, right? Let's spin up an environment and let the security team see what they can see. Analytics, really, there is endless use cases for another copy of your data, right? So a non-disruptive copy of your data that doesn't impact environment. And it can kind of also help you with your DR site, right? So let's actually click that right here and then 1-click recovery, right? So on disaster day, it's a matter of a click or pretty much a click, and it's going to run your DR plan for you, and you'll see through the UI everything happening in real time, which is really simple. But I want to tie back to this data reuse a little bit more because I have a lot of customers that they have trouble getting budget for that DR site because they say, Melissa, I can't get a DR site. We're never going to use it. Yes, you are. You're going to use it for DR testing, and you're going to use it for full-scale testing. You're going to use it for patching and security testing, compliance and analytics, and pretty much anything you want. So when you have a story of, hey, look how easy it is to use these resources. I can go in and click a button, or I can schedule it, and I can let my app teams in and have a test environment at a moment's notice or whenever they want, because the app teams can actually access their applications right through the orchestrator UI. It'll pop open the VM console for you, and you don't even need to log into vSphere. So it makes a really powerful case for actually investing in that DR site if you haven't been able to so far.
And it's funny because you bring up the DR site and the cost justification, because there was a question in here asking how do you bring that conversation to senior management? And we deal with it all the time, right? It is a risk reduction and cost and a cost game, right? There's someone usually in finance or accounting who knows how much time you can be down before layoffs start to happen or people stop getting paid. And so that is, if you figure that in the data protection report, we said that on average, we're seeing the downtime costing $88,000 an hour. You can do the math to figure out how long you can be down for before you're completely out of business.
And let me give you a little pro tip, right? We've talked a lot about risk and things like that. There's literally mathematical equations that are used to calculate risk. And one thing variable, and there's multiple forms of this, right? Quantitative, qualitative, whatever. There's always a variable there to the effect of what is the probability of this actually happening, right? And usually it's a probability of 0.002 to have a meteor strike or whatever. Yeah, the probability of ransomware is going to happen, so it's 1. And it fundamentally changes the output of that equation. So all of these kind of businesses who just accepted the risk all these years because it was so much cheaper than actually doing DR the right way, yeah, it doesn't really fly anymore when we bring ransomware to the equation because the probability is just so high. So really, it's about making a case for protecting yourself from ransomware. And I guarantee if you are sitting here as an infrastructure person or a backup team person and you don't have any money, I bet the security people do. So you should go talk to them about this too. Because when you say I can help you with ransomware, they're going to open up their ears, right? And again, it ties back to this testing, right? How can you put a price on the ability to prove your RPO and RTO? I can prove to you that we can recover in this amount of time if disaster strikes. Like, how do you put a price on that? It's almost priceless, right? And that's where testing comes in. You have to test at scale to simulate real world recovery. You have to test different recovery environments. You can test in place, go ahead, but you better test a DR site or a cloud or something else because you might not be able to recover in place. And then keep testing automatically, right? You can schedule these tests to run pretty much whenever you want. So if something changes in your environment or more workloads have come online and you haven't realized it, but you have everything set up that it's just protecting your workloads, right? Because you can actually do that with Veeam, right? Through the power of vSphere tags. Once a VM comes online and is tagged, it can get added to your backup jobs and your disaster recovery plans and all that kind of stuff, right? If you haven't been good at keeping track of things, you'll suddenly see, and when you do your DR test, wow, we don't have capacity, or wait, things are slowing down. Suddenly we're not meeting our RTOs, but we were before. What happened, right? So you have the time now to figure out the issues so you can fix them. So when disaster day does come, you don't have any issues recovering.
There's a great question in here. Have you seen a noticeable shift in leadership teams from, quote, this can't happen to us, to, quote, we regularly see this in the news and realize it can really happen to us?
I actually have, believe it or not. Now, whether that means they're actually doing the right things or not, that's a whole different story. But like, so I do talk a lot about ransomware recovery and disaster recovery and security in general when I talk to Veeam customers. And I can see that I've seen a fundamental shift in the groups I talk to, where now the directors and the VPs are coming, right? And they're not just the infrastructure people anymore. The security people are coming too, to hear me talk about basically the talk I just gave you today, right? To educate them on, okay, here's what we need to do to be able to plan for a successful ransomware company. So I've been seeing a lot of adoption in the Veeam disaster recovery add-on to VBR. I've been seeing a lot more interest in general. But it takes time, right? Especially on the size of your organization, right? Sometimes in big organizations, something as simple as putting in a new backup product could take like 18 months, right? This stuff isn't going to happen overnight. So I've seen the shift happening. Is it happening as fast as I would like? No, because I was telling Chris the other day when we were getting ready for this, like I go into Google News every day and I type in ransomware and there's always someone new. There's always something new. And I hate seeing it, right? Because I know that not that the ransomware, I don't believe ransomware can be prevented actually. I think they're always going to get in somehow, but you can be able to recover and you can have the confidence and the ability to prove that you can recover. And it's not that difficult. We went through pretty much the basics today. It's really not rocket science. It's just a matter of sitting down, determining those RPOs and RTOs and putting together a plan to protect that data so that you can recover it later. It really isn't difficult, but it does take planning, and it does take that person to say, you know what, no, now this is a priority and we have to be able to recover.
And there's part of that shift too, is that there's been a noticeable change that the backup teams are being invited to the tabletop exercises from the security teams, that the backup team is actually being asked to prove that your data is available and that it can be recovered in a timely fashion. Another interesting statistic that's in that data protection report that's in the handouts is that 89% of the folks that we surveyed said that they had a gap between the amount of data that or the time that they could back up their data and the amount of data that they needed to restore quickly. So it was both a technological gap as well as a confidence gap to be able to say that yeah, we think we're backing it all up, but we're not sure that we can get it back when we need it, which is crazy. Because why are you backing it up why are you backing it up if you don't know if you can get it back?
I'll never forget this. This is I used to be a systems engineer for a storage company that their logo was a big blue N. I don't know if I'm supposed to say the vendor or not. And I remember I was designing a backup repository actually, and I had to call in. I was brand new, and I had to call in someone a little more senior to help me out. And I was like, well, they just said their backup window is 8 hours, and the backups have to finish in 8 hours. So I have to figure out how to get this thing fast enough to back up in 8 hours. And he looks at me and goes, Melissa, what about recovery? I'm like, well, they didn't ask about recovery. They said they have to meet their backup window. He goes, no, they have to be able to recover. This backup is useless if they can't recover in time. How long do they need to recover? What time do they have to recover it? And so I went back to the customer, and they're like, oh, well, we never thought about that. We just know we want our backups to run in 8 hours. So then that started a whole kind of discussion of, well, how long does it take us to recover, and when do we need this data back? So sometimes people aren't even thinking in the terms of, oh, how long will it actually take me to recover this?
And you think about the most recent attacks, like, I keep going back to Colonial Pipeline. They had all their data. They had it. The company,
that's the first step. That's better than not having it, right?
But they decided to pay $4+ million because they couldn't get the data back quickly, and they're not a Veeam customer yet, but they couldn't get the data. They couldn't get the data back, so it was the business decision to pay $4 million and hope that they got something back and recover.
And by the way, that decryption's not like super fast or anything either. It's still going to take you time to recover when you decrypt.
And they're bad guys. So what else have they done to the data?
Exactly.
So yeah, and there's a couple other questions in here talking about when you were referring to being able to do your patch testing and things like that. Somebody actually brought up one of my current favorite topics is software supply chain attacks.
Oh.
So for those of you who don't know, we saw a couple of them last year with SolarWinds and Kaseya being the big two. Legitimate software packages being updated with corrupted patches that are introducing malware into the environment, and that is becoming a larger entry point for attackers because they have access to GitHub, where companies are using a lot of open source code, and maybe they're not testing it. So it's incumbent on us as the end user to do our testing for those patches, not just to make sure that they work and they're not going to break anything.
That's a good point. Well,
sure, it's important that they don't break anything. It's important that they don't break anything. True.
Intentionally break anything, right? Maybe it is intended to be a bad patch, or maybe it isn't. It does include malware, right? So that is an excellent point, right? Testing those patches before you deploy them.
Yep.
Never know what you'll find.
It's always an adventure. If you recover nothing, nothing guarees that paying the ransom will be equal to the functioning key. That's true.
That's a good point too.
It doesn't mean that just because you pay the ransom doesn't mean you're going to get the right encryption key back. Their quality control might not be all that great. I mean, they are criminals.
Help with the customer service department.
There was another question in here I saw, and I'm scrolling looking for it, asking about how you prove immutability to your insurance companies, which is a really interesting question.
So that's a really interesting question as well. So I can tell you that you should absolutely go to VeeamON and watch a session on Veeam 1 version 12. Because I don't know, there might be some things that you could get out of Veeam 1 and hand to your insurance company that might prove immutability. So I would take a watch that session to learn more.
Weird. Anybody familiar going to be doing that session?
I don't know. Maybe. Maybe.
And for those of you who don't know, VeeamON is happening live in Las Vegas this year, but it's also happening.
Yeah, there's also an absolutely free virtual component. So I can tell you, I think I recorded 3 sessions, and I think everything had some component of ransomware recovery in it, because that's just what I do, right? So you can go learn about Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator 6, which we'll talk about the new features publicly for the first time. Don't miss that one. I alluded to a bunch of stuff today. When you see that, you'll be like, oh, that's what she was talking about. Kirsten Stone and I gave a very similar presentation to this one about the ransomware protection trifecta with the Veeam platform, and then Veeam 1 version 12, Veeam backup and replication version 12. There's a lot of new things coming, so definitely take a look. And again, everything is going to be online for free if you can't make it to Vegas or don't want to go to Vegas.
Some of us have to go to Vegas. So now. Do you have a question? If it's not too late, what is the veil of Veeam 1? I don't understand the question. So if you're
okay, I can talk about Veeam 1 till they clarify that, I guess. So Veeam 1 is part of Veeam Availability Suite. So if you already own Veeam Availability Suite, you own Veeam 1. Or you can add that on to Veeam Backup and Replication. And that is basically for monitoring your data protection as well as your vSphere environment, et cetera, et cetera. But really the focus is on monitoring that data protection to do the things I said. Find those unprotected VMs, check your jobs, make sure they're running as expected, check for things like suspicious incremental backups or jobs taking longer, like signs of something going wrong, that kind of thing.
So you just answered it. It was quick typo. It was value of Veeam. So
it adds tremendous value to backup and replication. And I gotta be a DR nerd for like 2 seconds here. If you need to like actually do a legitimate sizing to figure out, I don't even know what kind of DR environment I can do. I do that with Veeam 1 all the time too. So you can get a ton of performance data on your virtual environments and on your backup environment as well. I could go on and on.
And it is amazing. It is amazing. I've been engrossed in the data protection report and the upcoming ransomware trends report. So it's amazing to me the number of organizations that don't actually test their backups, or they have to make some kind of janky script that does it for them.
Veeam can do that all automatically a bunch of different ways. There's a lot of possibilities out there, again, depending on what your requirements are. But we can, like, one of the hallmark features is Veeam Sure Backup, Sure Replica technology. Orchestrator is powered, but uses some of that under the covers. Like I said, it kind of adds on to VBR. And that's something Veeam has been doing for a number of years, right? And when we talk about a DR test, it takes that core technology of Sure Backup and data labs and virtual labs and just takes it a step further and runs your whole DR plan, right? Instead of just, hey, did that VM start? Is it good to go? Does it actually work?
Yeah, it's amazing to me the number of folks who just kind of trust it's going to work. The other side of that too is that the number of folks who are just recovering in place and hoping for the best thankfully it's going down.
It's going down, but it's not good.
Yeah. This scrolls automatically. That's kind of annoying. Somebody's asking, can we send you to Vegas? You can go to my place. That's fine. Is cybersecurity insurance currently and realistically obtainable, or have premiums been put out of reach for smaller companies? That's actually a really good question.
That's good.
There are companies out there that are merging together your cyber insurance with your response tactics.
There you
go. So they're
as part of your cyber insurance, there's like an incident response retainer built into there, where it basically says you have this policy, and the first thing we're going to call is XYZ incident response firm and get them in here. And that is the key, right?
And they're going to do the testing beforehand to see where your weak spots are. Yeah. So they're going to do your pen testing, your tabletop exercises, that type of thing. So is it too expensive for small companies? Like everything else in technology, it depends. But there are companies out there that are merging these processes together that are designed to help smaller companies, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
What does your training platform look like for small companies? We've got an entire training platform over on Veeam On. You can get certified end to end. As a matter of fact, we're doing training out in Vegas as well. Let's see. Somebody's talking about that how they're doing testing and reporting as part of their GRC process. Awesome.
Gold stuff.
Asking about malware detection in your backups. This is so
like a hot
okay.
button for us.
So we can absolutely scan for malware inside of a backup. There's and you can
a couple different ways to do it actually.
Yeah, you can either do a straight AV scan, or you can actually use like your EDR products, that type of thing. I would argue that, and Melissa mentioned it before, if you're scanning for your malware in your backups, you've probably missed it already. Where it makes sense is when you're doing a targeted recovery.
Yeah.
Your incident response team knows what the IOCs are, the indicators of compromise. They know what they're looking for. They know what's been affected. Being able to scan for that type of data is where you're going to see value from a malware detection standpoint. All of this hype that some companies are throwing around about their ML and their AI and all that crazy stuff is just that. It's hype. It's noise, and it's not what you should be buying your backup products for.
Yeah, and absolutely. When it comes to scanning for malware during recovery, we can absolutely do that. That is not a problem. Go to my session on Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator version 6. Wink, wink. There'll be some cool stuff about that in there. Just saying. I don't think I should be saying that, but I'm saying it anyway. We're getting close. I'm too excited.
Can you replicate on-site or off-site within a hybrid cloud environment? Yes, right?
Sure we can. Absolutely. Where do you want to send it? I'll get it there for you. We can use the scale out backup repository. We can use backup copy jobs. There's lots of different ways to do it.
Are all these features included, or is this a tiered subscription? No, you get the license for the product and you've got all the features. As a matter of fact, I would argue that there are some features that our customers have that they just simply don't know about because they haven't looked yet.
Probably. That's a good way to say it.
How did you say you can mitigate malware spread through the applications that run in your hybrid cloud? That's actually a really hard thing to do. You're probably going to do that more with EDR, endpoint detection response product. The big boy indicators of compromise scans as opposed to signatures, right? Can you talk more about a ransomware experience you had in the cloud?
Yeah, I would love to. Do we have enough time? Are we good on time? Okay, no, we have like 5 minutes. It's going to have to be all right, I'm going to tell my little story, then we're going to have to go on to the summary. Actually, it was around this time last year for VeeamON. I had to build this crazy lab in a public cloud, and I had to be replicating with actually Veeam CDP. It had just come out, this version of Orchestrator and CDP. I had to be replicating from on-prem to the cloud and show a live recovery. Pretty cool. Except Melissa was just needing to get this thing working. So I followed security worst practices, and I just had like RDP open everywhere so I could get to whatever. I just did not care because I just needed it for this one thing. So I go to log in one day and like nothing works on my desktop. And meanwhile, I'm logging into my VBR server, right? My VBR server. So it's like kind of important. I'm like, nothing's working. So there's like this text file on and I guarantee they got in with RDP, right? So there's like this text file on the desktop. And it's like, you have been ransomware and send Bitcoins to like whatever. And it had like an AOL email address. And I just like started laughing. And what I did is I nuked that VBR server from Orbit because I had a copy of my backups. And by the way, my repo was on the VBR server because it was a bad cloud deployment. So I just like laughed. I deleted the server. I had all of my backups also going to Azure Blob Storage. So I went to my Orchestrator server, which has an embedded version of VDR. I connected my external repository. I rescanned my repository. It saw my backups, and I just restored everything I needed. It took me like 7 minutes to recover. It was sick. It was ridiculous. It was so easy and it was so funny. But it just kind of shows like my terrible half thought out lab was still good enough to recover. So it kind of proves that as long as you put like some level of thought into your data protection, you're going to be able to recover later. That's my fun ransomware in the cloud story. I love telling it. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. So we're coming up on time. There's so many questions in here. We will do our best to answer as many as we can. But just in summary, we've talked about a lot of capabilities today, and when we're talking about these, we're, like we mentioned earlier, that we're not talking about it as a tiered subscription. It is baked into the product. So when you buy any of the Veeam products, you get these capabilities, and they're designed to essentially work together so that you can have hate to be marketing about this, but a more trusted solution for ensuring that you can get your data back. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about making sure that you can get your data back when you need it the most, and not having to jump around and worry about how something should work or how it could work. Melissa, any thoughts before we hand it back over?
Not really. I mean, now is the time, right, to put the steps in place to make sure that you're ready to recover later. That's what it comes down to. You got to put in a little work up front, but it can be done, and you can prove that you can recover and meet your RPOs and RTOs.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We've had a good time. I hope you've enjoyed this time. We will absolutely be answering as many of the questions as we can afterwards, and so we will hand it back to our host.
All right, excellent. That was a fantastic conversation. So, thanks, Chris and Melissa, for putting that together and for taking all those